we're going to approach the panel in this way. We're going to ask, first of all, Grant really to talk about Part 4A as it presently is and how it works. I mean, many of you will be familiar with that, but I think it's important just to put things in context. Second, I'm going to ask Graeme to talk about what it is that's motivated the government to cause these amendments to be made, in particular the case law, and refer, not a deep discussion on the case law, but to mention what has come out of the cases which has caused the government to want to change the law. And then I'm going to move on to ask Graeme and Grant to go through the changes, word by word and very carefully, just to set the scene for the discussion which will follow. And don't worry, Baldrick will have a significant part. So without more ado, I think I'll ask Graeme if he might not start off by talking about, sorry, Grant, by talking about Part 4A as it is. Thank you, Grant.
Thanks very much, Ken. Part 4A was introduced in 1981 by the then Treasurer John Howard. And it was introduced to deal with problems in the law that had been revealed by a number of cases, including Curran's case, Slutskin's case, Westtrader's case. It replaced Section 260 of the 1936 Act, and the famous case in relation to that is Newton's case, and in particular Lord Denning's judgment in respect to Newton's case. In the 1980s, there was no litigation in relation to Part 4A. In fact, the first litigation came 10 years later with a decision in Peabody. But I think it was realised that Part 4A was a bit like Singapore in the Second World War. The guns were facing the wrong way. And whilst there had been a focus on deductions and assessable income, people had forgotten to deal with foreign tax credits and withholding tax. So there are a number of amendments to Part 4A to include within its scope those elements. And some of the things that, some of this tidying up here, some of the amendments in relation to this tidies up those provisions and melds them into a more coherent whole. Then there was a section added, or part of that added in relation to franking credit provisions, and we're going to park those aside. There's been a major case, Mills case, that was recently decided by the High Court in relation to those. But the major distinction between those franking credit provisions within Part 4A is the level of purpose that needs to be obtained in order for those provisions to be triggered. And that is, whilst the main provisions require a sole or dominant purpose of obtaining a tax benefit, and I'll come back to those elements, the provision in relation to franking credits simply provides for a more than incidental purpose, so it's a lower level of purpose. So you can think of Part 4A now as having two sort of elements: the sort of the franking credit element with its more than incidental purpose, and the main element. And what we're here today is to talk about the main element. The main element is divided into three pillars, and they're quite separate and independent pillars. And some of the discussion that we will go into is how the two of those are conflated. But the three pillars are this: scheme, tax benefit and purpose. So in broad terms, Part 4A applies if you have a scheme, the sole or dominant purpose of which is to obtain a tax benefit. Scheme is very, very broadly defined. It may well become a battleground as to what schemes are, but it's incredibly broadly defined in 177A of the Act. So then, if we go to purpose, and purpose, in looking at purpose, the Act requires you to consider 8 factors, and they are contained in 177DB of the Act. And then there is tax benefit. And tax benefit does this. It asks you to look at what actually happened and compare that to what would have happened or would have been reasonably likely to have happened. And that will give you the amount, if you like, of the amount, the tax benefit, the amount that the Commissioner will be able to assert should have been paid as additional tax. So 3 pillars, they're coherent pillars. You don't look to purpose elements to work out what the tax benefit is. Scheme, compare what actually happened with what would have happened or is reasonably likely to have happened. And then for purpose, look at these 8 elements in relation